Okay, ich fange schon mal an und Jacob wurde jetzt schon auf der Bühne gesehen, aber ich stelle mir vor, wenn er kommt. Links neben mir sitzt Renata Avila. Sie ist eine Menschenrechtsanwältin, die sich auch speziell mit dem Thema der Whistleblower und Leute im Exil, mit Asylfragen und so weiter sehr gut auskennt. Rechts neben mir ist Joseph Farrell. Er ist ein langjähriger Mitarbeiter von WikiLeaks und einer der engsten Vertrauten auch von Julian Assange. Und John Goetz ist ein Journalist, der auch gerade mit Ströbele bei Snowden in Moskau gewesen ist. Das hat man vielleicht mitgekriegt. Auch einen langen Artikel geschrieben hat in der Süddeutschen kürzlich über Sarah Harrison, die Frau, die mit Snowden von Hongkong nach Russland gereist ist, auch eine enge Mitarbeiterin von WikiLeaks und soviel ich weiß, arbeitet John Goetz für die Süddeutsche Zeitung. Genau. Gut, jetzt warten wir immer noch ein bisschen. Vielleicht gebe ich dann den Moderator einfach weiter, bis Jacob da ist.
Okay.
Aber es gibt noch mehr Mikrofone.
Machen Sie auf Deutsch?
Nee, auf Englisch. And now we will turn to English because most of our guests are English, so I hope you don't mind.
Thanks for introducing everybody. I think the idea at first was for everyone to... here's Jay. You want to introduce? Do you want to introduce Jay?
Yes. Yeah, maybe he doesn't need any more introduction, but Jake is many things. He's an actor, but he's also a journalist, a photographer, an activist, and a specialist for technology and so on and so on and so on. But at the moment, I think his main thing is being a journalist. He is writing for the Spiegel magazine, and most of the articles that you have read in the last months were also, he was collaborating, and he also wrote some long articles himself you might have read.
So we wanted to limit this to 1 hour, and we want to get statements from everyone here, and then also at some point questions at the end. So the idea was that first of all, for each person on stage to talk about their reaction to the evening with a brief opening statement. Joseph, do you want to begin?
Yeah, I could begin, except I thought it was a Q&A. I've seen this play, this is the third time, and it's been updated very slickly, and that's probably my main reaction.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think I would like to ask you guys how would you describe, Renata, what you experience on your daily basis work with people who are in exile, and how is it sometimes frustrating to have the feeling that you cannot do much about it, or how is it for you as a human rights lawyer?
Well, as a human rights lawyer, I think that cases like the asylum of Snowden and the asylum of Julian Assange help so many others, like without the famous name or the famous actions. Like thousands of people who are pleading for assistance and who are running away the same way that Julian and that Edward did. Like they are fearing persecution. They are fearing prosecution in their countries. They are escaping that political lynching in their countries. And we don't hear about them every day in the news. We don't hear about the many times that the rights are ignored by so many powerful people. And I think that these kind of cases are highlighting the importance of human rights as an effective mechanism to protect not only those persons, but also the truth that they are bringing to the world, or the political change that they are bringing to their countries. And I think that that's hopeful. I think that if 2011 and 2013 can leave an important lesson is that there's still, human rights are more alive than ever, and it is up to us to defend that those rights remain as effective as they are.
Renata, maybe you can also talk about how some countries are actually trying to avoid people claiming asylum.
Well, that's tricky because we heard a lot of things about the third world and about these dictatorships and so on, but actually I was shocked by that. Like even countries in Europe, taking very, very dangerous actions pushed by a third country to deny a fundamental right, because the right of asylum is not only to receive asylum, but to seek asylum. And the way that the airplane of Evo Morales and other actions were taken, not only here in Europe, but in Latin America, economic pressure and political pressure on global leaders to deny these fundamental rights is outrageous. They look like medieval sermons of a king, I think.
I mean, at least when I think about the actual issue of trying to seek asylum and imagining the kind of pressure, it seems almost, it seems like an impossible task for Snowden, for example. I've spoken with some people in various parliaments around Europe, and usually what they say is that they're afraid. They're afraid that if they were to grant asylum, that they would not even be able to protect Snowden. And it's really an amazing thing to imagine a member of German or Austrian or Belgian parliaments saying, well, we're not really a sovereign nation. Basically, if we were to bring him here, it would not be safe. I mean, there is, of course, some debate about this, but there is this overarching fear about that. And, in my daily life, I think, I work with Laura and with other people, Glenn sometimes, more Laura these days. And, there's an interesting kind of denial that runs through some of the discussions that are had. I think, Laura believes that she's going to premiere her film she's been working on just any day now. When she's finished with it, we'll just fly back to America and show it. And I think that that's one way to plan for a very near-term future. But I think it's not very realistic. It seems very much the case if we look at Julian and we look at Snowden, probably won't go well for the rest of us. That's on my darker days I feel that, and on my brighter days I think we'll at least live long enough to see those darker days come.
In terms of questions from the audience about, to the people on the panel, how do we want to do that?
I think I would just like to ask you something. Maybe you can say a little bit about, I'm not sure how from the general audience is. You just mentioned Laura, maybe you can just describe what Laura did and...
Maybe you can do that.
Laura has been one of the most fearless people I've ever met in my life, in a sense, but in another sense, to be without, to be without fear is actually a bad sign, right? So there is some fear. So I would say, in some ways, she is very good at overpowering that fear with courage. And what she has done is interviewed.
Laura Poitras is the journalist who met with Snowden in Hong Kong, together with Glenn Greenwald, and now is working for the New York Times and for Der Spiegel.
Yeah, exactly. And she's a filmmaker who's worked for many years in conflict zones that are extremely dangerous, including in Iraq and in Yemen. And she's unbelievable in just the fearlessness I feel that she displays, in a sense. Her courage is incredible. And she just released a great story with James Risen and the New York Times about the NSA's strategy for the next 4 years, or 2012 to 2016, as well as talking about a thing called Treasure Map, which is a program that the NSA has for basically real-time analytics of the entire internet. And this, she's really revealing things that, I feel like a regular person would really fear being murdered for revealing. That really some of these people, they're very dangerous people, and she's incredible. I wish she could be here.
Okay, you mean we should go to the...
Well, I think that people have questions.
Yes. Okay, we can go over to the questions. Okay.
It's a little bright.
You don't have any questions? There was some. Okay. It's hard to see them, that's the problem.
Makes sense.
Okay. Das Mikrofon funktioniert nicht?
Hello?
Yeah.
I recently saw The Fifth Estate and I've read Julian's unauthorized biography. I'm just wondering how accurate is that a portrayal of him as a person? Tricky question, possibly.
It's the unauthorized autobiography. So that in itself is a ridiculous name. I don't know how somebody can write an autobiography and then not authorize it when it gets published. It's not accurate. The Fifth Estate is based on 2 books, which are extremely hostile. One is written by a previous WikiLeaks volunteer, It is also, I believe, stocked in the US military Air Force libraries, so you can be sure it's not going to have anything good to say about it. They're not going to put something that is a complete propaganda in their favor. And the other book is written by 2 journalists from The Guardian, also who felt a bit disenfranchised and left out. So the rights for the Fifth Estate was taken from those 2 books, and even then it was changed some. So it's not accurate.
But just as I'm trying to picture him or imagine him as a person and imagine his motivations, things like that. It's a little bit hard to pick through these different sources and find something that tells me what he's like as a person.
Well, that film is definitely not it. I mean, at the core of the film, I feel like the whole theme of the film is to villainize him and make him seem like a 2-dimensional character. I mean, if there's one thing that Julian is clearly, it's that he's deep and thoughtful, and this film does not convey that at all. I mean, he's even, not into Julian, but he's even actually significantly more attractive than this Hollywood actor makes him out to be. I mean, they really, in every possible way that they could say something awful or do something awful about him, they did. And, to Daniel Blumschegberg's credit, I asked him before he worked on this film to please make sure not to harm anyone. And it was pretty much a given that this film was not going to be kind to Julian, but to their credit, they really didn't do a lot of harm to other people that they could have. There are some exceptions, but really they focused entirely on attacking Julian, which does not portray him. He is not like that. He's a really incredibly smart, compassionate, caring person, and he is an Australian, so there are cultural differences that I can't stand. But that is not the same as the motherfucker that they portrayed him as in that film. I mean, really, for example, when they talk about him being too paranoid, this is actually a really fantastic thing, because being in some of those scenes, myself, with those people, they were completely rewritten. First of all, to not include anyone except for Daniel and Julian, which was not what happened. But actually, everyone was very stressed out and extremely worried about, for example, people following them around in Iceland. The stress was beating off of Daniel's face, off of Julian's face. You could really see it. And in the film, it's like, only Julian is stressed out, and everyone else is just totally fine. And it's of course not reasonable when you're stressed out, which is just nonsense.
Well, I kind of disagree a little bit with Jacob, because I saw the film and I saw real harm in a particular issue, and it's the volunteers behind WikiLeaks, because the movie shows that it is just 2 guys with a laptop and then a 3rd guy like really dumb and inexperienced. And that's not true at all, even from the outside. And through the years, WikiLeaks has been around a long time. There's a huge community of human rights activists, lawyers, librarians, coders, like hundreds of people volunteering for that site through time. And also, those people donating money, donating servers, donating skills to the organization, that's what the movie wants to kill. And that's, I think that's the unstoppable force that governments are really afraid of, because you will never volunteer for the National Security Agency unless you are Google or so. But if you are committed to justice and truth, and especially in countries like mine, or I remember some of the first leaks of WikiLeaks were related to issues in Colombia, issues in Peru. Places where a free press or even a rule of law is not in place. So yes, there's lots of volunteers that are totally invisible, and the international dimension of WikiLeaks, even before that happened, is totally blurred.
There's just one thing I wanted to say about the film. I take it not that many people have seen the film, but there's this film Fifth Estate, which is out, which tries to tell the story of the releases that happened around Afghanistan, Iraq, and then Cablegate. Now, I worked at Der Spiegel at the time, and one of the things that I think is an important point that I think people forget is that Daniel Domscheit-Berg, who's played by Daniel Brühl in the film and is seen as this kind of major figure, he played virtually no role that I could observe in the whole period when we did Afghanistan, Iraq, and Cablegate. That's just one point. The second thing is that the whole film leads up, we were planning to do a story on this, but we didn't manage to do it in time for the film release. But it's a very interesting point, because the whole film leads up to the fact that there's this drama around the names of the sources in these Cablegate documents. And the film presents the situation that Julian Assange is just dying to release the names. He can't just wait to push the button. And that Daniel Domscheit-Berg is trying to stop the entire time. No, Julian, don't do it, stop, no, we're gonna hurt, these people are gonna get hurt, and don't do that. And there's kind of a symbolic figure in the film, a Libyan who's gonna get tortured, basically, if Julian pushes this button. And the fascinating thing is that the release of the Cablegate document names actually was the exact obverse of what's presented in the film. It was actually, the names came out by the fact that Daniel Domscheit-Berg at the time was working for the German newspaper Freitag, or working closely with them when he was doing his Open Leaks project. And it was actually, that is the way that the names were released, through Domscheit-Berg's work with Freitag. And it's just interesting, because that's the major moral lesson of the film, is that Assange was willing to do this. And I was a witness at the time. It was actually the complete opposite of what happened.
And I think to add to that, it's important to note that during Manning's trial, General Robert Carr said under oath that there had been no harm caused by the unredacted names going out.
Other questions?
I should say just one thing more, which is, I just had such horrible expectations for what would happen, that it was a relief that this was what we ended up with. It was better that many of those volunteers, I think, were cut out than should they be named, for example. And my expectation was actually that that would occur. But of course, it's disrespectful to literally hundreds and hundreds of people that I personally met or that saw, this work. But it was better, I think, that they were left out of that piece of history, because then you know that it's propagandist bullshit. And that's important, because there are many people that watch this and say, hey, I was actually there, and I was cut out of that. And I'm glad, because it shows it to be skewed, and those people, should they choose to step forward, they can even discredit that. That's sad, though, because people will think that it is true. They'll think that it is history. But it's important to note that it's bullshit, written by people that really have it out for Julian. And I'm at least glad that their hate didn't spread to harm other people. It could have harmed them in a much more serious way.
Okay, we have a question over here.
Ich stelle die Frage auf Deutsch, kann mich jemand übersetzen?
Ja.
Warum und vor wem muss die ecuadorianische Botschaft in London geschützt werden?
Why and from whom must the Ecuadorian Embassy be protected from? It's not the protection. I can answer that. I will have it in German. Also es ist nicht so, dass... Okay, it's not that they are protecting the embassy, they are just taking care that Julian Assange will not go out, because when he go out, he would be arrested and probably extradited, first to Sweden and then to the US probably. But maybe you can answer also.
Yes, but also just right before Julian was granted asylum, there was a threat to break into the embassy. And it was a very confusing episode, very sad episode for British authorities, and especially for the British foreign relations, because they were about to break customary international law and the Vienna Convention as well, by breaking into the premises of the embassy just because someone was exercising a right of seeking asylum there. And the interesting thing is that just months before, it was the UK government, the one issuing a warning saying that the premises of embassies were not, that you could not enter there, because it was a case, I think, in Iran, just the same case, Iranian authorities trying to break into the UK embassy. So it was very interesting to see how what they preach, they don't exercise.
I just want to add that it has cost the UK taxpayer £3 million for the whole year of surveillance, which the Mayor of London has actually said is ridiculous that they have to do that.
Here in the front.
Hi, it's great to see you all here from the Chelsea Media Network. Reloaded, it's great to see you guys here. I have a question, going back to the play that you mentioned, that people need to react at the same time all over the world in order to move this forward. Do you have any suggestions how we can engage a larger audience, for example, the youth? Because we were at a demonstration earlier this week during the parliamentary debates, and there was really not too many people. I was very glad to see the barristers and the lawyers in robes in front of the Bundestag. It was quite an image. But I see that the youth is very disconnected, and how can we engage them, and how can we push the issue of political accountability in Germany? It seems to be quite an enigma. Thank you.
Leak more documents? I mean, sure, leak it with WikiLeaks, normalize it by leaking the documents to this man, to me, to anybody here. I mean, not only that, but I think it's incredibly important to reach out and work with people that if you are worried about the youth, I don't know, you seem pretty young yourself, but it's, breaks, I don't know. But, so find somebody and work with them. And for political accountability in Germany, I think the key thing is to show that people are affected. And when we broke the story about Merkel phone, that changed the domestic surveillance debate in America and the international one in the sense that it joined them. That's what flipped Dianne Feinstein from not caring at all about the dirty foreigners to realizing that some of you dirty foreigners are actually her friends. And I think that, young people have a particular thing, which is that they're able to get jobs and infiltrate these organizations. There's a phrase from the Chaos Computer Club that's someone you trust is one of us, and the leak is higher up in your organization than you. And I think that teaching these lessons, people, it's important to basically create change inside organizations. And if we don't have interesting, good, and moral people inside of these groups, it'll be very difficult to change them. And it'll be even more difficult to understand those organizations and those groups. So I think teaching that, but also setting a good example.
When Jacob says that leak documents, it's important. With leaking documents, it's important who you leak them to. So, with WikiLeaks, for example, we promised to do a maximum impact to the source, and that is creating a lot of noise in many places at a coordinated time. We have more than 110 media partners who are all local experts, and so it's a coordinated leak is what's important. That's what happened with Cablegate, and with all the other stuff that we did with Cablegate was one of the most significantly viewed.
There was another question, in the middle. Ich glaube, 10. Reihe vielleicht.
I just wanted to say one sentence about
Yes.
the book. It is interesting that there's not been yet a German Edward Snowden.
It's even more interesting that Germany hasn't given Edward Snowden asylum. I think that that's actually a totally shocking thing. Or Julian. But the fact that Edward Snowden doesn't have asylum in Germany is a really fascinating thing, because many times we hear people say that they can't give him asylum because they couldn't protect him here, because the US, for example, would do something. And the subtext is that Germany is not a sovereign nation, and that there isn't a return, as if it's a capitalistic investment to give someone political asylum. And I wonder what lessons have been learned from the 20th century if that calculus is present. Because can you imagine someone discussing, well, we couldn't give this guy asylum, what would we possibly gain from it? It's about the moral authority, not about profit.
And actually, if a tiny nation like Ecuador and a kind of fragile nation like Venezuela were brave enough to step in, say, I will give asylum to Julian Assange and to Edward Snowden, why a powerful nation that has all the wealth, and all, maybe it's because of that, you know? Maybe it's because of all the wealth. But is the wealth for the people, or is the wealth for just a tiny number of people whose interests are so interconnected with American interests that they make all of you an unfree nation? It's an interesting question.
But to be fair, it's not, it's not America as a whole. It's a very select set of specific criminals like Clapper and Alexander and Obama and Holder and the rest of these people who have broken either their oath or they have not even gone under oath and then simply lied and lied and lied. And so I think we haven't seen a German one actually, because in many cases the US actually lies to the Germans and the Germans just believe it. And that's an unbelievable thing, but it's true. I mean, the Merkel film thing is a perfect example. The German government really believed that the NSA was not spying on Merkel. They really believed it. And so when there were tens of millions of Germans potentially being spied on, they sort of understood it, but they didn't really think of it in this way. And it was only when the US admitted it that it became undeniable that that was the case. But I really, truly believe that Merkel was not in on it, didn't believe it, and didn't believe that it would happen to her, which is crazy, actually. I think that's insane. Because we know that they spy, we know they've continued to spy. And they'd even do it without the US people having given consent to doing this.
There was a question?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm pretty nervous. Regarding to the play you saw, you said one problem of the current publications is that everything what comes out is just piece by piece. And as an organization like WikiLeaks, what would it change to have a certain institution which will publish not piece by piece or in information that is always already reviewed by some journalist and the information in it is interpreted already? And so when you have an organization which would publish everything, does that change anything, or what are the people saying to that? You guys.
Well, I can say one thing about that, and that is that the way that things are going now with the publication of the Snowden material being happening very slowly and happening in different countries with weeks in between it allows the very generally incompetent American national security state a lot of time to prepare for the next one. And so you have a situation that they're able to think about how to respond, they're able to prepare, and a different strategy of publication where things would go more simultaneously, with a different kind of rhythm would not allow the United States as much room and ability to respond.
To be fair, though, there's one thing that's important, which is you have to assume a lot of good faith in their strategy. For example, they had a ton of time not to lie, and they lied a whole bunch, and then they got called out and caught. And that happened like 10 times in a row. Like, you think that they would have just learned, like, just don't say anything. Don't say anything for 3 weeks, and at least then when we get caught with our pants down again, we won't also be lying. And there's this sort of deep irony in that, and I think it wasn't even intentional. But this is just sort of a side effect of this current strategy. And there's strengths and weaknesses with both of these things. And I think in some cases we're missing the big picture because we don't have all of the things out at once. But on the other hand, we've actually managed to convince tons of world leaders, I mean, literally something like 25 or 35 of them, that they also need to care about this issue almost on an individual basis. But first they said, oh, it's okay, it's just necessary, or it's proportionate, or, well, it's never illegal, or it's never for economic espionage, or, well, it would never happen to the most powerful woman in the world. And then slowly but surely, each one of those people was made to look like a fool. And that, I think, actually is very powerful, even though it is not, I think, the only way or the ideal way.
But the question was, the question was, how would it be different if there was a different strategy?
But you as a journalist, do you agree with this strategy of this scheibchenweise leaking the stuff? Or
Well, I mean, I think, I don't know that this interests anyone, but I'll be happy to say what I think about it. And that is, what we have now is a situation where basically two journalists have a monopoly on the material, right, with some exceptions. And if that is, so you see that basically Glenn Greenwald has gone around the world and been in partnerships with different newspapers. Laura Poitras has partnered up with Der Spiegel, and now with the New York Times. And I think it would make more sense to have a more collective way of looking at it. Of course, it would also be good for me as a journalist. So anyway,
But whatever happened to these other links? What was it called?
Offshore?
Yes. Yes. Offshore links. Whatever happened to that? You know this category in the Stern magazine. Whatever happened to? Was macht eigentlich?
You mean Domscheit Berg's organization?
No. Offshore link thing.
The International Consortium for Journalism with David Lee's also on it. This the offshore banking.
No, about the Steuerbetrug,
Yeah.
And you never heard of this. I mean, it was big news, and then it was said. I mean, really, it's like whatever happened to that, and why? And then they said it's a real big collective of journalists. Now I have two microphones. A huge. Yeah, a huge collective. And we never heard of that again, I guess. What are the consequences of the offshore links?
ICIJ.
Go ahead.
And I have a problem with redactions because yes, I can, but I can't trust really journalists. And so I don't know if, for example, those documents with the, I mean, it's like the voice. I feel frustrated by seeing heavily redacted documents or incomplete presentations on this situation of the NSA. And so I wonder what is behind it. I wonder if I will someday, because journalists are acting as they are protecting their states, but I'm not national of those states, so I kind of really don't care about the national security of a foreign state. And I wonder what's behind it. I wonder if they will act like declassified documents, and in 50 years we will know what they redacted and why they redacted that, and what the real consequences of redacting it, and not letting us know right now what's going on. So.
I think the worst part about the redactions is actually, if you look at the Washington Post and the Guardian for their Tor story, for example. So I've actually seen the original material of that story, but the Guardian didn't know that I'd seen it. And I have been working for quite some time to try to make sure everything that was in these documents that we would work to protect our users, because in the case of Tor, where I work, the Tor project, it was very important for me to protect our users, anonymity for every person, no exception. And I asked the Guardian very clearly, is there anything in these documents that you think would, without showing my hand that I'd seen these documents, that I would need to know about in order to protect users? And some of the extremely arrogant motherfuckers at the Guardian said, no, there's nothing you need to worry about. And then it gets much better. The Washington Post and the Guardian released almost identically redacted documents where they've removed so many pieces of information that they effectively would have kept a zero-day exploit, that is a bug where someone could break into a user's computer. And they would have still been able to use that against people, including activists and people that are clearly not terrorists. They didn't say this in the documents. And they redacted it. They kept it a secret. And they even let GCHQ and the White House pressure them to keep the story quiet for a long period of time, when they were pressuring us originally because they wanted to go. And so the worst part is you see what is out now. And I can tell you that there's lots of stuff that's missing from those slides. And if we had not seen it, if we did not know about it, if any of you were using Tor, you would be in harm's way. And so it is a matter of collaboration, and these redactions are absolutely unbelievable. And in some cases, they really screw them up, and you can know this. So read the pages and look at the page numbers. And sometimes you'll see it's slide number 1, 2, 5, 70. Hey, what happened? Right? And it's really fascinating also because they screw up all the time. So always immediately when the Washington Post publishes, download the files that they have put out, and then come back a couple days later and download them again. They will often be different. They'll redact them after they've put them out online. Usually Cryptome is a good place to find the original and the later redacted ones. But I mean, that's something where I really feel like there's a lot of collaboration going on there, and because there's technology involved, especially in the Tor story, basically the government can just wave their hand and say, oh, knowing technical details is just too much. It's too much. So you have to redact all of that. And many of these journalists, they don't know anything about the technology, and so they just go with the government in that. But I mean, in some cases, it's really obviously the case that they're doing things that are criminal, literally criminal, and then those redactions are taken to support that criminal activity, essentially.
Okay, there are more questions.
Questions about that?
There's one advantage in the current strategy, that is that only 2 people have full knowledge of all the leaked documents, that Snowden took out of the NSA. And currently the NSA is in full panic mode. They have no idea what has been taken. They estimate that it's about 50,000 documents. It's the most recent number I've read. And as long as not all documents are in possession of different magazines, newspapers, there is no way the NSA can know how much is out there. So they always have to expect that when they are saying something, that next week there's going to be a release that disputes their lies.
That's a good point.
Yes. Okay.
Sorry. I have actually 2 questions. First one would be, how high do you consider the chance of Julian Assange will ever take one step as a free man out of the Ecuadorian Embassy in London and will be delivered to Ecuador or another country that will give him asylum? And the second question would be more to the journalists. I want to know how the unraveling of all those documents and all the knowledge that the NSA is taking a look at everything that actually happens on the internet did affect your work, your daily business as a journalist. Are you afraid of being, that your telephone is severed, your emails are checked, everything like this?
Did I hear the question right? What is the likelihood of Julian stepping outside of the embassy? Is that it? As a free man? There's a long way to go, but I don't know how long it will take. Currently, as you know, if he were to step out of the embassy, he would be arrested by the English police because there's an outstanding extradition order to Sweden. The Swedish case, which isn't really a case, is falling apart bit by bit. And if that were to happen, and all the Swedish allegations were to be removed, there's a very strong likelihood that America would then bring in an extradition request to England. So even if he were to step out, he could probably go through the same process that he did with Sweden. It would then have to be argued whether his right to asylum pre-exists, which takes preference, the right to asylum, which has been granted by Ecuador, especially in the view of the right to asylum was granted because of his fears of persecution in America, or does the indictment in America pre-exist it, because it's probably a sealed indictment. That would probably have to be argued in court, and I imagine that the laissez-passer to Ecuador would take preference. So we'll get there.
And not only that, but the current situation in the UK makes the case of Julian even more complex. You were wondering that a few weeks ago, a few months ago, all the unprecedented threats to the press there. So I was back in 2010, I was kind of hopeful that maybe the courts in England will defend a publisher like Julian. And maybe if the situation in Sweden is clear, maybe he will have this slim chance that the court will protect the right to publish. But now with this, the NSA revelations have also revealed the true position of governments in the UK. in the US, and that's the only difference with Germany. In Germany, we have seen, and that's why journalists like Jacob, like Sarah Harrison, and Laura Wolters are living here, because there's still strong defense by courts and by the system and by the public of a free press, and I think that will make his fight more complicated. And also the continuous, UK is constantly ignoring human rights, and is trying to get out of the EU and also repeal the Human Rights Act, which is terrible. So it is just going from bad to worse, I think.
I'll just make a quick comment about being a journalist. I work, by the way, for NDR and for the Süddeutsche Zeitung. Just in the key thing I think that we've all learned from this, as well as from some other cases, is how important it is for us to protect our sources. And that if people are giving us information, we need to protect them. And of course, there are precautions that we've taken for that, and ways to communicate with people that are not, that are safe. There's a really dramatic case in the United States of a former CIA agent who was a source for a journalist from ABC News, who was using Google Mail and kept on writing to his editor saying, hey, now he's told me the following 3 names of people who tortured, now he's told me this, now he's told me this. And that email was all intercepted, and that guy, 4 or 5 years in jail right now, because that journalist wasn't careful.
I would say that my job working with other journalists, especially in collaboration, is much easier now, in the sense that previously many of these journalists had these complete asinine ideas like, oh, they're not surveilling me, but that would be outrageous if someone were watching me. And they think about it in terms of wiretap, or they used to. And now many journalists have come to terms with the fact that we live in a world with dragnet surveillance and whole life monitoring. And if you happen to work on a story where someone else would be an interesting target, the surveillance will pick that up and automatically start to watch the journalist. And so now journalists will contact me in collaboration and say, gosh, I'm so sorry I'm not using PGP. Or I'm so sorry that I called you on the telephone. And I'm sorry I had to call a friend of yours because you don't even have a telephone because you hate telephones so much. But we really should meet, and I'll make sure I'm not followed, for example. And that's much better, because there was a time several years ago, people thought Julian, for example, was totally crazy for wanting to use the Tor network to have people leak documents. But he understood, as many of the cypherpunks did, how serious the surveillance was. And many journalists didn't take that seriously at first, and now it's as serious as a heart attack. And that is actually a really fantastic thing. And now many journalists realize how serious that is. And journalists that don't specialize in technology are really gearing up and learning about that. And that, to me, is a very positive outcome of this. It hasn't changed my behavior much because I was also aware of these things, and I've worked on anonymity technologies for a long time. It's made it much easier because I no longer feel like such a stick in the mud.
Can I go first?
There was one first. You just did the second one.
Yeah, I've been waiting. So, I think that the panel discussion is very much focusing on the journalistic worldview of truth-seeking, and I feel very respectful of that. But I think that the play also has another side to it, which is a kind of ironic postmodernist sensibility. And that's what I like about it, and it's exemplified, for example, in the quote from Slavoj Zizek at the end of the play, when he talks about the ideology of truth and information, which I think is a simplification of Julian Assange anyway, because I think there's a lot of irony in what he said, things that he says, and that he himself is self-critical about this journalistic ideology of truth, because I think the quote from Slavoj Zizek was brilliant, that if you believe that revealing the truth is going to bring down the system, again, I think that's very important, and I feel very supportive of that worldview. But I think we need much more education in more recent forms of surveillance. The Edward the Snowden NSA stuff, the debate in the United States is very much still within an Orwellian perspective on what surveillance is, where you have Obama saying, the government is not listening to your calls, the government is listening to your calls. What we have in the internet are much more postmodernist and hypermodernist versions of surveillance, essentially a logic of deterrence, the deterrence of you from expressing your freedom by knowing that it's all being recorded, rather than the actual use of emails and conversations that they've recorded, which only in a tiny minority of cases is actually going to lead to some legal or criminal action by the government against you. So we have all these logics of self-surveillance, mutual surveillance, simulation of surveillance, and I think we need more education about that, as well as, when you reveal what the CIA or what the Pentagon is doing in a war in Afghanistan, you're leaving out the virtuality of war, the fact that it's a television war, it's a video game, it's a home entertainment system for the hundreds of millions of Americans sitting in their living rooms, watching the damn thing on TV. Sorry, I went on for so long. No, I had no question. It was just a comment.
Thank you. Okay. So next one.
Question over here.
You were saying, Jacob, you were talking about journalists now being much more careful and all. I was wondering, especially journalists, as far as I know them, but I deal with them on a whole other level. Like I make music, and so it's a different thing. But especially journalists sometimes are technically very, very actually uneducated. They write, but it's so hard, for example, to make sure the right picture is actually printed. You've got files sent over, and the credits are not right, and then it's an altered file, or whatever. There's so many technical questions, and so many things just all the time go wrong on so many different levels. How do you deal with the fear of all the others, third parties, journalists, like the whole editing offices? How do you deal with the fear of things just could go wrong? Because obviously you guys are super professional and accurate with everything, but once the third party is involved, aren't you afraid that at some point something will actually go really badly wrong? And how do you deal with the fear, and how do you make sure it doesn't actually?
Well, it's not fear, it's certainty, first of all.
Certainty that it will go wrong.
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, there are journalists that I think there are journalists that I think well of, and that I would trust to work with documents, and who I've either trained myself or we've really reviewed the way that they handle things to protect sources. And those ones I try to think of them in the sense that we have a mutual understanding, but that if something like a primary source document were to come from my hands to their hands, I think of a clock ticking, right? It's just a matter of time before this becomes public, this information, whatever it is. And if it goes to a newsroom, that clock is probably less than a day before, let's say, whoever is, in the case of working on NSA-related stuff especially, there's no question that the NSA is monitoring lots of interesting people and lots of interesting newsrooms. So at some point, when you hand over the finished work product, you know that the game is up. That, people who are plotting some sort of response, they're going to have the information they need to start filtering and doing things. And so to that end, I'm really selective about who I work with. For example, people who have a great reputation, who I've seen working, doing things in a really professional way. This guy, for example, is a good example. I would work with him, and I think that he can keep it secret. Most journalists can't, and they don't take it seriously. And if they don't understand the way these things work, if they don't have almost a hacker mindset towards their own profession, I mean, you just have to treat it as a certainty, and you have to know that especially as a journalist, you have a responsibility not to fuck your sources over. And so never give an original document to someone that you don't trust, especially because the metadata in that document might hang someone, potentially literally, or put them in prison for 35 years like Chelsea Manning. And that's a certainty. And most of the things where we talk about fear, not just in the journalistic context, but in the whole debate about surveillance, certainty is where I think we should be looking. It's not whether or not we have fear about a thing. Most of the really awful things are going to come true for someone. Maybe not you, but that's not a good reason, I think, to engage in things that are so dangerous. So you should try to do it right, I guess. That answers your question.
Yeah, I have a question to the two members of WikiLeaks. I don't know how far you are in the decision-making progress, but are there some things in retrospective which you would have done differently from now? Or are you satisfied with the decisions you make and it's just the outcome you cannot really expect?
Well, it kind of leads on to the previous question. When you put things into third parties' hands, you have to work out if you can trust that person, or that party. Before I put it into the context of if we're working with media partners, we will research them significantly beforehand, and you learn from working with them whether you will carry on working with them or not. But I would say that we have learned from our past experiences. I think to say otherwise would be arrogant and it doesn't really open your mind up to improvement. But I think we've done a very good job.
I just want to say one thing about the whole notion that the NSA is listening to everything and that they're on top of everything. I mean, just in terms of having done reporting on intelligence issues for quite a while, it's easy to forget that these are very incompetent institutions run by dysfunctional computer systems. I mean, the NSA computer system was a complete disaster. And there was a huge court case around the hundreds of millions of dollars that they spent on their own computer system that didn't work after 9 years of trying to build it up. I mean, we see time and time again that the amount of dysfunction, the amount of pettiness in the organization, the stupidity in terms of how things get run, in terms of good information not going up, and that, I mean, this is, I'm sure I'm probably the only person that believes this, but I'm convinced that Chelsea Manning, for example, never would have gotten caught if there hadn't been those chats that had happened. Because theoretically, it could have maybe found the actual computer where all that stuff happened. But on the ground, in terms of realistically, we're talking about very dysfunctional organizations. And I just think that's important to remember because I mean, sometimes I get the feeling it's like kind of people read 1984 and they're kind of in this perpetual state of fear, and they forget that the other side makes constant mistakes. I mean, if you look, the United States forced Edward Snowden to stay in Russia because they withdrew his passport. When they did their extradition request to Hong Kong, they didn't spell his name right? I mean, but those are just two of a zillion examples of how dysfunctional they are. That doesn't mean we should just no longer encrypt our emails or anything. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that it's important to have a more realistic view of their limits as well.
I have a question about the play. I think it's to Richter about the scene with the two women from Sweden. Assange said he didn't want to talk about it. So, but you did it, and I was wondering why did you make this scene? Was it a defense for him? And why did it take so much time? It was somehow, I don't know if it's the right word, dignity, what's the adjective for dignity? So I thought it's not so nice to him, or I didn't want to hear all this.
You mean it's not nice for him or for the ladies?
I don't know about that. It's not so nice for me to hear. I didn't want to hear it.
No, I can answer that. It was when I did the play the first time. this topic was much more urgent, or it was the main topic actually in that time, because everybody that I would talk to, or journalists or people who talked to me while I was doing the play, they all wanted to know if I think if he's a rapist. It was a permanent question, so I thought, okay, I cannot answer that. And so I decided to put these protocols in the play, because I also realized that most of the time I said like, okay, you have to judge yourself, you should read the protocols online, because what? Yes, the woman's own words, the police reports, yes, because they were online. And I often suggested to people that they just read them, because then I thought then I don't have to put them on stage. But most of the time people get very aggressive. It's like, no, why would I read that? And on the other hand, it was very weird. So I decided to put it on stage to just let everybody know what is in these protocols. Simple as that, you know, because most of the people kind of didn't want to make the effort, but on the other hand, they wanted to know. So I thought it's necessary to do that, and I must say, people receive these reports as a big part of the play. Every time I played this play, I cut them shorter and shorter and shorter, but I cannot make them only 5 minutes because it's unfair, you know. And so we reduced it, and I'm actually happy that it's not. This is tonight the first question about that topic. I'm really happy about that. Because when we did the play in Vienna, it was maybe a year ago. Yes, it was in autumn last year. I was very much attacked. Groups on the university were asking for the play to be forbidden, because I said in an interview for the Freitag, by the way, that I don't think that this is rape when I read the protocols. Only as an artist, in my opinion, I'm not a lawyer, so I have a right for an opinion. And they accused me of supporting rape culture. And people asked for the play to be forbidden. And I thought like, wow, it's weird that, that reminds me of other times in Germany when art was forbidden. And anyway, I think it should be a topic. And on the other hand, I'm happy to realize that this is not the main topic anymore. And I'm glad about that. That we speak about other things that are really more important. Okay. Another question? I think we should do two more questions, and then I think. Yes, please.
I have a couple of questions. So, you, Jacob, you said something about the Tor security problems and the news organizations who were making mistakes, and that I could download the original files from somewhere, and I don't really understand which page it was.
Well, what I was saying was just in the Guardian Tor story that they had redacted information that actually would help us to protect you. But lucky for Tor, or at least for me, in working for Tor, I had been able to see the originals, and so we were able to actually have real serious conversations that reduce the total amount of harm, right? It's not just the NSA that would be able to exploit the Tor browser, it would be anyone who finds these vulnerabilities. It's very important to fix them, because it's a bad trade-off to leave things vulnerable so that some so-called good guys can exploit them, because actually everybody can exploit them. And the point that I was making was that usually when they put these documents online for the very first time, that is after a long discussion of collaborative editing with governments in many cases. You know, phone calls. If you watch Media Stand, the latest WikiLeaks film, you'll see this interview with Bill Keller where he talks about, basically being on the phone with the White House, the State Department, the CIA, the intelligence community, the Department of State, and so on, and sort of figuring out what they can publish, being able to know that. And once they put it online, they often have made a mistake, and someone gets upset that wasn't involved in those discussions, and then they end up taking it down and putting up a more redacted version. This is a hilarious thing. It's happened many times with the Washington Post. So you can't see the original documents, but in some cases you can, in fact, see that there are changes that have happened after they've been posted. And in the case of the Tor documents, we think we've fixed all the problems that were identified, which is, I think, as good as it's going to get. It would be nice, though, if the Guardian just published the whole document. And they don't, because, frankly, in some cases, they enjoy their relationship with the political power, and in some cases they are under threat. And so there's a tenuous circumstance there where they sell you, as readers, short, so that they can, well, continue to publish or to continue to have their relationship with power in some cases, which is really disgusting in my opinion.
One more question.
Yes, one more question. Oh God, that's for me.
Here in the middle.
Okay.
I don't think he's spoken before.
Yeah.
Steve Jobs.
They didn't.
Yes.
I can't see it. It's good to see. It's amazing. It's hard to see.
Yeah. Maybe it's a question to the journalist and the director. We have the scandal of the year, but why is nobody upset?
Why is nobody
upset?
Lots of people are upset. What the fuck are you talking about?
There's going to be it's a consensus already that there's a German parliamentary investigation into the NSA stuff. It should begin in March. That's a very real thing that will accompany us for the next 2 to 3 years.
What does being upset look like to you? What has to happen for you to feel that there's a consensus about being upset? Like something, cars burning in the streets, or I hear this so often, and I just think to myself, like, people are upset. I'm basically living in exile in Germany. That's how upset I am. That's how dedicated I am to revealing the truth about these issues. So what has to happen, I wonder, for you to acknowledge that there are people like myself that are upset about this? I can't wait to hear the answer.
And actually, if I have to say, Latin America, both civil society and the governments, we are very coordinated, and we are launching like a unprecedented campaign to change the internet for good. There will be a very important meeting in Brazil in 2014. Gilbert Rousseff leading it, and Germany kind of contributing to it, and lots of global leaders, and especially Latin American leaders, but other leaders from the global south, are gathering there to take, this will not be as it is in the future. We will fix this.
But what really though? What
that is the proactive anger, I think.
There's a nice quote, which I'm paraphrasing from Jefferson, which says something like, the perfect recipe for tyranny is that people keep quiet. So it's good that people are upset and not keeping quiet.